The traditional site of Mount Sinai for centuries has been in the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula. In 530 AD, St. Catherine's Monastery was constructed at the northern foot of the mountain. This placement of the historical landmark all rests on the vision of Constantine's mother, Helena. She was known for her many visions, but she never set foot in the peninsula. And even without a shred of evidence found at her sites, they remained traditional for centuries because no one dared to challenge the queen's claims. Resting on these empty claims was also the traditional route of the Israelites out of Egypt. It was assumed that they took a route out of Goshen in a more southerly course, eventually crossing the Gulf at Suez. Years passed and more claims emerged that they simply crossed the swampy lakes near Goshen, claiming that it was no miracle, but rather natural events which can be easily explained away. No miracle needed. But these claims must ignore other important key details to the account. There are many different claims to the exact route they took and which body of water they crossed, but only one path provides an astounding amount of evidence. Let's take a look at it. Through only recent discoveries, originally by Ron Wyatt, it has been shown that much evidence describes a very different path than previously thought. In fact, one would have to seriously overlook major findings regarding this path and turn a blind eye to the implications of these discoveries. From the scriptures, we know that the Hebrews took a route through a place called Sukkot. From there and southeast, they traveled through the desert. After crossing a broad area, they came to a mountain range which would render any attempt at a massive scale migration too difficult. The region is nearly impassable, except for a very narrow canyon called Wadi. This canyon proved a relatively safe traversable passage. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land, the wilderness has shut them in. The walls of the canyon are very steep, keeping them well confined to this narrow passageway, yet still providing a passageway relatively easy to traverse. We see that the Wadi comes to an end at the shore of the Gulf of Aqaba. This posed a great threat of entrapping them between the Wadi and the sea. We find here that this beach, which is the only one like it on the coast, is very large enough to fit the massive multitude that left Egypt. Some say 2 to 3 million. Here on this beach, we find a very peculiar area that has been melted. Sand and stone fused together by some unknown source of intense heat. Could this have been where the pillar of fire touched the earth? It is described as preventing the Egyptian army from following the Israelites into the sea passage. And the angel of God, which went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them. And the pillar of the cloud went from before their face and stood behind them. And it came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. And it was a cloud and a darkness to them, but it gave light by night to these, so that the one came not near the other all the night. On the water's edge was found a large stone column where the crossing appears to have taken place. This eroded and damaged relic would not have been enough to mention if it were not for a secondary discovery of another matching column found on the opposite shore of the crossing in Saudi Arabia. This one, much less eroded and still standing, provided intriguing writing still found with Phoenician Hebrew words including Mitzrayim, which is Egypt, Solomon, Edom, Moses, Death, Pharaoh, and the Tetragrammaton, YHWH, meaning Yahweh, which is the name of our Heavenly Father. This second column has since been removed by Saudi authorities. One can assume that King Solomon had these columns placed here to commemorate the crossing. Next, we find the discovery of chariot wheels, swords and shields in the Gulf of Aqaba.
He and the boys then donned their scuba gear and began to investigate what may lie beneath the waters of the crystal-clear Gulf. On the first dive, Ron found chariot wheels preserved by the coral which had attached to it. He found an axle with portions of each wheel still present. These chariot wheels were very difficult to see and recognize because they are covered in coral, and the portions that were not covered have disintegrated. In February of 1988, he found this gold four-spoke chariot wheel in the same general area. There is no coral on the main part of the wheel because coral doesn't attach to gold, only around the hub area where some wood was exposed when it came off the chariot.
Which vindicates the story of the Exodus and crossing of the Red Sea, with Pharaoh's army being engulfed by the returning water. When divers found one golden chariot wheel, the gold gave way to the touch, revealing that it was hollow inside. This accurately shows how the wooden wheels would have disintegrated over time, leaving behind the shell of the gold plating. Some would say that the Gulf is too deep to cross even without the water, but using sonar underwater mapping techniques revealed a land bridge extending from the very beach, Nuweiba, across the opposite shore of the Gulf. With this finding, it becomes more and more difficult to refute the possibilities. Given all this evidence, to have so many parts of the account readily made possible through solid and confirmed scientific observations, the odds that this part of history was contrived by some simple herdsman are impossible. The true Mount Sinai, known in Saudi Arabia as Jabal al-Laz, also has some unusual characteristics that compels one to take notice. The entire upper portion of the mountain is blackened. Now, many would say at first glance that it is just a darker type of rock. But those that have actually visited the site say that it is absolutely the same type of stone found elsewhere in that region. When they flipped over the stone, it was the same tan brown color as the stone below the darkened area. No other mountain in that region has this darkened effect on the upper parts, only this peak. It draws the question, why? What caused this? The scriptures describe an event that sheds great light to the situation. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because Yahweh descended upon it in fire, and the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. Is it possible that the mountain peak was darkened from the fire? Again, we see physical observations that confirm the events of the scriptures, which have no other rational explanations. On this mountain is also found a level plateau on top, easily providing a place for Moses' interaction with God. Also, a cave exists on one of its sides, which could have also provided shelter for Elijah, described in the scriptures. Those that were able to climb the top noticed something striking from that view. Near the base of the peak, they noticed a stone formation that resembles a stone altar. This is considered the place where the Hebrew Israelites placed the golden calf and worshipped it. Further investigation reveals petroglyphs that do not match the known local history. They are very much out of place. Some of these show images of calves, even a 7-branched menorah.
So that's when he rented an airplane in Eilat. And from this airplane, he flew up and down the shore of the Gulf of Aqaba to see if he could find a wadi that would allow the Israelites to come across. So as he flew up and down, he saw this huge beach, which was Nueva. And in later years, a couple of years later, Ron took Rennie Norbergen with him to the beach to show him. And Rennie wrote about it in his book here that you can see. And he told Mr. Norbergen that he believed it was Jebel El Lawz. So when he looked at the flight maps that he was able to get, he saw an area that appeared to be enclosed in the rim of an ancient volcano. And to the best of his figures, he came up with an area of about 5,000 square acres. And he knew that would certainly be large enough to be the camp of the Israelites. Ron had applied for a visa to get into Saudi Arabia for 4 years. He tried hard. He wrote to the embassy, and it was impossible to get a visa in. So he had arranged for him and Ronnie and Danny to slip across the border. And when they did that, they were able to pick a taxi who drove them out so far, and then they got another ride. And they made it right to the mountain. And it was the Bedouin who said, "Oh, Jebel Musa Henna." And they knew they were in the right place. And what Ron saw on that first trip, there were no fences back then. There was nobody living there. And he was able to drive actually into the Holy Precinct area. They just drove right in and around, and he saw everything. He saw what looked like an altar to him. He saw a lot of stuff that day, but then they had to leave. They were run out. When they came out, they were run out of the area. And so
The city of David and its ruins still remain intact today. Ongoing investigation